Hello, my name is Megan McCombs Hayes, and I am the Lexis rep for the state of Oregon. So I have the 3 law schools down in Oregon. Today, we're going to be going through your research problem, so I'm going to go ahead and log on to Lexis Advance. If for some reason you do not have a code for Lexis, please reach out to Quinn, your regular research Lexis attorney. So every time that I start a research problem, whether it's starting with a secondary source and going into my materials for the appellate brief or in a memo, whatever I do, I have to create good search terms. That's my first initial task whenever I'm starting anything. I'm looking at your particular problem, and those search terms that I was going to use for today are going to be sexual harassment and non-disclosure and settlement and prohibit. Let's talk a little bit about how to create a good search on Lexis. So you've seen that I've insert an and in between all of my terms. Now, notice that I have not put quotes around my specific phrases such as sexual harassment or non-disclosure. Searching on Lexis is different than what you're probably used to for searching on other research systems. And that is that I do not need to put quotes around my specific phrases because Lexis is going to look for my search terms exactly as they are. I don't need to assume that it's going to put an or in between my phrases. It's looking for sexual harassment as a phrase and non-disclosure as a phrase. The and is the connector. That means that somewhere within that document, those two terms on either side of it have to appear within that particular source. So the way that this search is going to run as a terms and connectors search is going to look for the term, the phrase sexual harassment, the phrase non-disclosure, and the term settlement and the term prohibit. But I haven't manipulated the system so that it looks for it any more specifically. And this is just an overall good search approach to cast a very broad net if I don't know enough about my topic and the way that these terms are discussed and their relevance to each other. If for some reason that you need additional ideas on how to create this type of search, all of those more specific things on how to create an advanced search for terms and connectors is going to be under advanced search using connectors. I use the and, but there's other ones you can use as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and reinsert my terms. Typically when I start any sort of research problem, I will automatically go to secondary sources. However, this particular issue is a little bit more difficult to research because it's so new. If I were to start in secondary materials, because it's so new, I'm going to have a very difficult time finding things under secondary sources and treatises or ALRs. The most likely place I would find something is law reviews. But as you do the research, and maybe you may or may not know, most of the bills that have been introduced are within the last 3 to 4 months. So the likelihood that I'm going to find something in law reviews and journals is pretty small. I can sort by law reviews and journals and then sort by relevance or sort by date to see if there's anything that is very new about this particular topic. I know just from your particular problem that most of what has been introduced was within the last 6 months, and the last one is from May 1st of 2017. So the likelihood that something's on point directly relating to these particular states that have passed legislation or introduced legislation talking about non-disclosure agreements and settlement claims is pretty limited. I could go to my secondary sources to get a good understanding about this topic and maybe some background information, But for now, just understand typically that's what you do, but for now we're going to go into state statutes and legislation. I know specifically that I want to look first for my jurisdiction. Now I'm not looking for federal, I'm looking for state. So I'm going to go ahead under jurisdiction, expand that, and select multiple. I'm now going to select all, and this is just an easy way to quickly do it, and I'm going to unselect federal. Then from here, I'm going to go down, and I know at this point also that there aren't any statutes or codes that have been actually enacted about this, so I'm just going to choose bill text, public law, perhaps it's made it there, legislative histories, and bill tracking to filter my first results. And that brings me down to 133 results. Now, going through and sorting through statutes and legislations can be a little bit overwhelming, particularly because sometimes your titles may not be relevant to what you're actually looking for. However, if I look at this first initial result, it says prohibits state funds being used to pay sexual harassment settlements, prohibits non-disclosure agreements for sexual harassment settlements in certain circumstances. This could be relevant to what you're particularly looking for, so I'm going to start here. Notice how it says in certain circumstances, so this may not be helpful, but this at least gets me started at one state that might have started with this particular issue. So I'm going to scroll down. First thing I notice, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is that whenever I'm looking at my bill tracking number, and this is specific to bill tracking reports, I'm going to have a legislative outlook in detail that tells me how likely that this bill is going to pass. I'll also notice where it's at in the progression of the legislature and through Congress, and it's just been introduced. And then underneath here, I have my synopsis and then a history of what's happened so far with this bill. It was just introduced, let's see, about a week or 15 days ago, within the last couple of weeks. I have my sponsor, and then I have my particular verification of what it's under. The next thing I'm going to want to look at is I'm going to want to look at all versions of this particular bill. So I'm going to go ahead and click over under related legislative material, and then I'm going to look at the legislative profile if I want good information on this particular bill. And then finally, I want to see why is this bill so unlikely to pass. So I would look here. We're going to do this step again on a better a better bill that's been introduced, but this is the process that I would go through. I would pull it up and then go through my related material to have a clear understanding of where it's at in the process. It hasn't even gotten to the hearing part of the process. All right, the next thing I'm going to go through is right underneath here, and this is New York State Senate Bill 7511. It gives me a legislative, that it's in the legislative bill history. Here's another one. Here's a House bill from Florida. And we're actually going to go to number 6, 2017 Senate Bill 6972. First thing again I want to pay attention to is it's the bill number, so I'm going to want to keep track of this for later on because this is going to be something I'm going to refer to as I go through my particular research for this problem. The next thing, it gives me the title of the bill, and this is in relation to discrimination based upon sexual harassment. And then finally, I'm going to look at how all of my hits have appeared. So here it's specifically talking to bar confidentiality provisions relating to sexual harassment actions and settlements. This seems on point. It's also telling me the general purpose and idea of this particular bill. Then it's going to go into specific provisions and give me justification. This is really good information for legislative intent. It's given going through the justification of why are they actually publishing and why are they trying to enact this bill and what is the purpose for this particular legislation. Then I'm going to go through and see everything else that's related to it. And then the next step I'm going to do is go over here again under About This Document to go to my bill tracking report. Remember, my bill tracking report is going to give me a nice synopsis of everything that's happened within this particular bill. Again, here I see my legislative outlook, and in this particular bill, it's a high likelihood to pass. So let's go ahead and let's start here first. This is exclusive to Lexis, and this is going to give me a good sense of the likelihood that any bill is going to pass. And as you can see, it goes through and has a outline of certain types of bills, their success rate compared to other bills and where they're at. And this is just a nice, helpful understanding of what's happening within the particular bill and also how likely it is to pass given the current legislative outlook. The next thing I want to pay attention to is where it's introduced. So it's been introduced, it hasn't gone through committee yet, so that also is going to tell me that there may not be that many hearings to go through and help me understand at this point what is the legislative intent behind that. Now I did see that previously, but this again is going to tell me that there's not going to be a ton of information out there for me to glean, but I will know here it's gone through committee, through different committees, and then again, who it's sponsored through. Next thing I would look at would be the legislative history. Again, I'm just clicking through these different things on the side, and they're all related to this bill, but they're all helpful in helping me understand how to apply this particular or understand this particular bill. As you notice, I probably would want to save this for later. I looked at it now, but I'm going to save this particular bill and the first one and create a folder. So I just selected them. I'm then going to click Choose a Folder here. Create new folder. And click Create. And then save it so I have access to it at a later time. I'm going to go through one more step just to show you how I go and continue this process. So obviously I'm looking for acts that actually have to do with my particular issue, and that's very easily done by looking at the hits and then looking at the title of the act. And here we have number 19, Senate Washington Bill 5996. This should look familiar to you. This was the act that was just, or excuse me, the Senate bill that was just introduced in the Washington Senate, and this is again that same encouraging disclosure and discussion of sexual harassment. It's going to give me this that prohibits an employer from requiring an employee as a condition of employment to sign a non-disclosure agreement that prevents the employee from discussing sexual harassment. That's exactly on point. So I'm going to do the exact same process that I did before. I'm going to go through my legislative histories and then select my bill tracking report. Again, I would go through the same thing where I look at the legislative outlook, I've noticed, though, that your Washington Senate bill has gone now through committee into the first chamber. So I have the opportunity then to look for more particular hearings and things like that. And notice that if I scroll down to the bottom, a public hearing was scheduled for last week, and therefore there might be something out there. Again, I'm going to go through and look at the legislative histories and all versions of this bill so I have a good sense of what else is out there. One thing, though, that I forgot to point out earlier that can be very helpful, particularly for these types of cases, or excuse me, for these types of legislation, is you notice up here the bell. I can create an alert so that if something or when something happens that's related to this particular Senate bill, and I'll want to do this for all of the Senate bills that I'm looking at, particularly if this is a long-term research project, and I want to make sure that I'm alerted when anything is voted on and acted or goes through that legislative process through Congress, etc. And then I would make sure that when I click on deliver, I set my end date to one of when my search or my research process is due, and then make sure also that you are inputting your email and you're not having to look at it online. And then frequency, make sure that it looks like you're only getting email notifications when an update occurs and not just every day on a daily basis. And I would go ahead and click alert or create alert, but I'm getting those updates when something happens with my particular bill. All right. If for some reason you have forgotten to save things or you're forgetting how to run that search again, I can always go back to my history and look at anything, particularly searches or documents that I have looked at within the last 90 days. Thank you so much for your time. Please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, Quinn Merrill will be happy to answer anything should anything arise.